On a gloomy afternoon at Windsor Castle, a door quietly closed behind three of the most powerful figures in the British royal family: Princess Anne, King Charles III, and Prince William. No guards, no advisors. No one outside that room knew what was unfolding. But in that rare moment of stillness, a secret buried for years was suddenly unearthed, a secret Princess Anne had kept hidden since the day Queen Elizabeth II took her final breath. She carried a letter old, perhaps yellowed by time, believed to have been written by the Queen's own hand, a message never made public, a final note that, for some reason, had never reached the world. Why did the Queen conceal this letter? What did it contain that compelled Princess Anne, known as the Keeper of Order in the royal family, to personally summon her kingly brother and nephew? And most crucially, why now? Beneath the calm exterior and royal protocols lies a story never told, a truth that could shake the very foundations of the Windsor dynasty. Are you ready to join us in opening that secret door? If you love untold stories and the deep mysteries of the royal court, please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because what we're about to uncover might change your view of the royal family forever. The silence within that room spoke volumes. What they discovered didn't just shock them. It altered the future of the crown. But the most stunning part was the name they found inside. And it wasn't who anyone expected. What happens next will leave you astounded. She never spoke to the press, never gave a speech, but Queen Elizabeth made her most powerful statement in silence. It wasn't written into law or carved into a royal decree. It came as a quiet message, buried in her final days, entrusted not to Parliament or crown officials, but to her daughter. Long before the public sensed the wind shifting, the Queen had already felt the storm approaching. She saw cracks forming in the foundation of the monarchy, the growing disillusionment, the waning loyalty, the rising whispers questioning whether the crown still mattered. And she knew that tradition alone would not hold the House of Windsor together. While many clung to protocol, Queen Elizabeth looked beyond bloodlines. She understood what few dared admit: the public no longer cared about ancient titles. They cared about connection, about trust. And she saw the trust not in Charles, nor even in William, but in Catherine, a woman not born royal, but who carried herself with more grace, strength, and sincerity than many who were. The Queen watched Catherine navigate the storm of public life, calm, poised, never complaining. She saw a woman who didn't demand loyalty but inspired it, someone who didn't seek the spotlight but illuminated it. And perhaps most importantly, she saw someone the people had chosen with their hearts, not by birthright. In her private writings, the Queen didn't suggest overthrowing the system. She wasn't naive. She knew the laws of succession were complex and rigid. But this wasn't about legality. It was about survival. Her words were not a command. They were a warning. The monarchy would not withstand the next generation on tradition alone. It needed relevance. It needed someone the people believed in. And in Catherine, she saw a bridge between the past and what the crown could become. She wasn't chosen by destiny. She was chosen by character. The Queen's vision was not shared publicly for fear of backlash, even within the family. Few were prepared to hear it. She had watched the institution bend to men who wore the crown, but struggled to embody its spirit. She didn't want to see it break. Her final act was not to change the monarchy from the outside, but to plant a seed within. A moral declaration, not a political one. A hope that when the time came, the right people would understand. But inside the palace walls, the Queen's hope clashed with royal tradition, and the fallout was just beginning. Three royals, one letter, and a decision that would never be undone. The sun had barely risen when Princess Anne acted without ceremony or delay. She summoned the most trusted members of the royal inner circle, Charles, William, and a small group of senior advisors. There were no public statements, no press briefings, just a quiet directive to meet in a chamber untouched by time. What they faced wasn't protocol. It wasn't a plan for the future. It was something far more dangerous. Truth. She walked in, her posture unshaken. In her hands, a simple leather folder. Inside it, the Queen's handwritten message. The same one she had revealed to Charles and William the night before. But this time, it wasn't for family alone. It was for the monarchy. She placed it on the grand table, looked around the room, and spoke with a voice that didn't ask for permission. This is Her Majesty's final wish. Every word was deliberate. Every breath carried the weight of an entire institution. As the letter was passed from hand to hand, eyes widened. Some trembled. The Queen's words weren't vague. They weren't poetic. They were precise. She wrote of Catherine not as a wife, not as a consort, but as the future. A woman shaped by spirit and strength, not by lineage. She was the one, the Queen believed. Who could save the soul of the monarchy? The room fell into stunned silence. King Charles was the first to break it. His face flushed. His fist struck the table. "This is madness," he growled. "Succession isn't a feeling. It's the law." His voice shook, not just with anger, but with fear. Fear of being erased by a vision not his own. Fear that the weight he had waited decades to carry might not mean what he thought. William said nothing, but his silence was louder than his father's rage. His eyes stayed locked on the words, reading them again and again as if hoping the meaning would change. But it didn't. Anne stood her ground. She didn't fight. She didn't defend. She simply reminded them Mother wasn't confused. She was certain. Her calmness pierced through the noise. The tension in the room became suffocating. The rules were still intact, but something unspoken had been shattered. William finally spoke, barely above a whisper. "What about me?" It wasn't defiance. It was devastation. He had spent his entire life preparing for this. But the Queen's vision suggested a different kind of crown. One not passed down, but earned in silence, in strength, in service. It was everything Catherine had become. And now it was everything William wasn't sure he could compete with. But while the palace boiled in silence, Catherine remained unaware, living the very life that inspired the Queen's belief. She never chased the throne, but the throne may have been chasing her all along. On the very night that history began shifting within Buckingham Palace's stone walls, Catherine sat in a quiet room just down the hall. Completely unaware, she had just kissed her children goodnight, tidied their toys, and now sat beside a window, her tea slowly growing cold. To her, it was just another evening, a moment of stillness after the day's chaos. But upstairs, the most powerful men in her life were unraveling over a letter bearing her name, and she had no idea. That's the irony of destiny. It doesn't always announce itself with trumpets or gold. Sometimes it waits silently behind closed doors, attached to a name spoken in hushed reverence. Catherine had never asked for power, never demanded recognition. She was never the type to draw attention. But maybe, just maybe, that's what made her different. That's what the Queen had seen long before anyone else could. Long before the palace, before the fame, before the weight of royal duty pressed against her shoulders, there was just Catherine. Born to a flight dispatcher and a former flight attendant, she grew up in a world grounded in hard work and humility. Her parents weren't nobles, but they raised their children like royalty in the ways that mattered through example. From her father's quiet reliability to her mother's relentless determination, Catherine learned that respect isn't given, it's earned. As a child, she left behind English rain for Jordan's heat when her father's job took the family abroad. There she adapted quickly, learning how to blend into unfamiliar worlds without losing herself. She didn't need luxury to learn grace. She didn't need privilege to discover poise. She was watching, listening, becoming. By the time the family returned to England, the foundation had been laid. She understood cultures. She understood silence. And most of all, she understood people. Her mother's family, descendants of coal miners, imbued her with an instinct to work for every inch of progress. From her maternal roots, Catherine inherited something far more valuable than status: grit. She didn't come from castles, but from people who endured. That made her different. She didn't learn strength from textbooks. She inherited it from bloodlines carved by survival. Even in school, she stood out not by being loud, but by being steady, reliable, calm. In a world obsessed with the spotlight, Catherine had already mastered the art of quiet influence. Leadership wasn't something she asked for. It became something others recognized in her long before she recognized it in herself. She didn't need to shout to be heard. She didn't need to lead to be followed. Catherine was built for something bigger, something that couldn't be faked, bought, or born into. And the Queen had seen it all along. But Catherine's strength wasn't just personal. It was proven time and again through quiet resilience in the public eye. They called her Weighty Katie, a cruel nickname that echoed through tabloids during the early years of her relationship with Prince William. It was meant as a jab, a mockery of a woman who had waited too long for a proposal. But what the public didn't realize was that behind that nickname stood a woman carrying something far heavier than public expectations. She was carrying the burden of restraint, of grace under fire, and of holding her own while the world dissected her every move. While critics labeled her as passive, what Catherine was really doing was enduring. And in silence, she was growing stronger. The pressure was unrelenting. Cameras followed her every step. Journalists scrutinized her clothes, her posture, her expression. And when the inevitable breakup came in 2007, it didn't just hurt, it exploded. The headlines feasted on it, speculating endlessly, gleefully. But Catherine didn't retaliate. She didn't rush into interviews, didn't publish tearful statements. She simply vanished from the public eye, held her head high, and focused on herself. What many thought was the end was only the beginning of something far more powerful. Because in that silence, Catherine proved a lesson most royals forget. Power doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it waits quietly until the world is forced to notice. When the couple reunited months later, it was different, stronger, more defined. Catherine walked back into that relationship not as someone clinging to a prince, but as a woman who had been tested and didn't break. The public noticed. The palace noticed. Even the Queen noticed. And in time, what once looked like hesitation began to look like preparation. When the engagement was finally announced in 2010, the narrative shifted. The girl they once mocked was suddenly the woman they admired. She married into royalty, not with spectacle, but with humility. She didn't try to outshine the crown. She respected it, but she also didn't shrink beneath it. Catherine struck a balance few had mastered. Her public image wasn't curated in palace boardrooms. It was built day by day, gesture by gesture, mistake by mistake. She learned the hard way. She earned her space the right way, not through entitlement, but through effort. While others leaned on their titles, Catherine leaned on action. She didn't ask for respect. She worked for it. Whether visiting children's hospitals, engaging in mental health campaigns, or navigating global tours with relentless grace, her presence was never forced. It was felt, authentic, measured, and deeply rooted in something far more important than lineage: integrity. With every event she attended, every cause she championed, every smile she offered that wasn't rehearsed, Catherine was shaping something greater than a royal role. She was shaping trust, and while the palace had seen many women step into the spotlight, few had done so by earning it from the ground up. But the world hadn't seen anything yet, because Catherine's quiet actions were beginning to reshape history. She cut 7 inches of her hair, but the message behind it echoed through the halls of the palace louder than any royal decree. Catherine didn't make an announcement. There was no press release, no flashing cameras, just a quiet decision to donate those strands to children battling cancer, to a charity that made wigs for those who had lost more than just their hair. It wasn't a gesture meant to impress. It was an instinct, a deeply human response from someone who never saw royalty as a performance, but as a platform to give back. And that's what separated her from the rest. Long before she became the Duchess of Cambridge, Catherine had already started showing the world what leadership through compassion looked like. In 2007, while still navigating life in the public eye as William's girlfriend, she organized a photography exhibition to raise funds for UNICEF. That same year, she hosted a charity roller disco event, not to flaunt, but to fundraise for a children's hospital. Her actions didn't come from palace protocol. They came from purpose. She didn't wait to be crowned before she started serving. She simply saw the need and moved. That momentum only grew. After marrying William, Catherine didn't lean on royal duties as an obligation. She made them personal. Just months after their wedding, she and William requested something rare. No traditional wedding gifts. Instead, they asked for donations to a charitable fund supporting 26 organizations. It was a bold statement, not just of humility, but of intent. This wasn't going to be a couple that played by the old rules. They were carving a new path, one where kindness wasn't symbolic, but strategic, where compassion wasn't a show, but a calling. Catherine's devotion to mental health became more than a public position. It became a personal mission. She visited psychiatric units, met with struggling families, and stood alongside those society often forgets. She didn't show up with rehearsed sympathy. She showed up with presence. Over time, her work with children's charities, early childhood development, and support for terminally ill patients earned her more than applause. It earned trust, real trust, the kind that even the most rehearsed royal couldn't fake. She wasn't trying to become the face of a movement. She was becoming its heart, and without shouting about it, without needing validation, she changed what it meant to serve in the royal family. For centuries, service had meant standing on balconies, waving at crowds, opening hospitals, but Catherine redefined it. To serve in her world meant sitting beside someone who was hurting, standing in the shadows where cameras didn't go, and lifting voices that the world often silenced. Her quiet acts weren't just admired, they were studied, observed by a public that had grown tired of empty pageantry. But her rise, though graceful, sparked more than admiration. It stirred questions William could no longer ignore. He loved her, but could he handle her becoming something more than just his wife? For Prince William, the answer was never simple. The more he admired Catherine's grace, her strength, her ability to connect with the public on a level no royal training could teach, the more he felt the ground shift beneath him. What started as admiration became something harder to define, a weight pressing down on the very identity he'd been born into. Because as the Queen's final letter echoed through the palace halls, it wasn't just the monarchy's future being questioned. It was his, for decades. William had carried the unspoken burden of the next in line, groomed, polished, prepared. He had endured the press, the heartbreak of losing his mother, the public's expectations, and the impossible comparisons. Through it all, he had remained composed, dutiful, and then came Catherine. Kind, composed, adored. At first she was his support, but now she was something more. The Queen herself had seen it, not as a consort, not as a compliment, but as the future. That revelation didn't feel like betrayal. It felt like loss of control, of certainty, of a destiny he had assumed was his to carry. It wasn't jealousy, it was something deeper, a quiet ache he couldn't name, because even when he stood beside her, even when he held her hand at public events, all eyes were on her, not him. And how could he compete with someone who wasn't trying to compete at all? The public adored her. Mothers saw a reflection of strength in her. Children felt safe in her presence. Even the media, once ruthless, had softened in her favor. And William, despite all he'd done, all he'd endured, was often seen as the extension of her story, not the center of his own. For a prince raised in the shadow of one of the world's most beloved figures, this familiar displacement cut deeper than he expected. Caught between his duty to tradition and the truth unfolding around him, William found himself in a silent war. Could he defend the old order when even his grandmother had seen something new? Could he embrace Catherine's rising influence without questioning what that meant for his own legacy? The woman he loved, his wife, was becoming the very face of the monarchy's survival. And that realization, while beautiful, also brought a terrifying thought. Maybe the world didn't need him the way he thought it did. And still, through the storm of emotions, he watched her. He watched her show up, speak softly, act boldly, earn trust without demanding it. Her poise wasn't rehearsed. Her authenticity wasn't a strategy. And that, more than anything, shook him. Because Catherine was not rewriting the rules. She was simply living them better than anyone else. But what truly stunned the palace was Catherine's response to the Queen's wish. And it wasn't what anyone expected. All she had to say was yes or no. But what Catherine said instead left the palace in stunned silence. In a world that often demands immediate decisions, loud declarations, and bold claims of power, her response came like a whisper through marble halls. And somehow it shook the ground more than any royal command could. When the Queen's final wish was finally shared with her, Catherine didn't leap at the idea of destiny. She didn't smile with pride or buckle under the weight of legacy. She listened, then paused, then chose something far more radical than ambition. She asked for time. It wasn't hesitation. It was discernment. Catherine understood what few could. This wasn't about titles or fame or proving herself. This was about the future of her children, of her family, of a monarchy trying to balance on the edge of history. To accept the Queen's vision without pause would have been easy, almost expected. But Catherine was never guided by what was easy. She was guided by what was right. And right now, what was right was protecting the delicate peace holding everything together. The room around her froze. Charles, William, Anne, all of them waiting, bracing for a decision that never came in the form they imagined. Instead of seizing the crown, Catherine protected the family. She chose stillness over speed, caution over conquest. Her calm, steady voice reminded everyone that real leadership isn't about declaring power. It's about understanding responsibility. It wasn't power that Catherine feared. It was the cost of wielding it too quickly. In that moment, Catherine showed exactly why the Queen had trusted her. Not because she craved the throne, but because she didn't. Her refusal to rush wasn't weakness. It was wisdom. It was the mark of someone who understood the weight of the moment and refused to let it crush the very thing it was meant to protect. She looked not at what she could gain, but at what she might lose: her children's innocence, her marriage's balance, and the fragile trust the public had finally begun to feel toward the crown. And yet in that refusal, she said more than any acceptance ever could. She revealed the kind of character that couldn't be taught by royal tutors or inherited through bloodlines. It had been forged through quiet endurance, tested in the fires of public scrutiny, and shaped by years of watching others stumble while she stayed still. The Queen had seen it long before anyone else. She hadn't left behind a strategy. She had left behind a compass. And Catherine, with one simple, stunning answer, proved she knew how to follow it. The palace didn't erupt. It didn't collapse. But something in it shifted. A quiet understanding passed between the walls and the generations standing within them. Catherine wasn't just the future queen consort. She was perhaps the soul of what the monarchy needed to become: measured, moral, and deeply human. The world hasn't heard her final answer yet, but the crown may already have. Thank you for watching. And then, after years of silence, Princess Anne finally broke through the wall of time, not with a grandiose press conference, not amidst flashing lights or before millions of curious eyes, but with a simple yet profoundly weighty act, handing over the Queen's final letter to the two men who will shape the future of the United Kingdom. We may never know the exact words Queen Elizabeth II wrote in that letter. It could be a warning, a testament, or even a strategic directive for posterity in a turbulent era. But the fact that Princess Anne chose this moment to unlock the secret when the monarchy faces doubt, illness, and internal rifts shows that the importance of this message lies not in the past, but in the future. The door to that room opened and closed, but its echoes linger, quietly spreading through the corridors of power and tradition. What do you think of Princess Anne's actions? Is this the beginning of a secret transition, or a sign of a seismic shift brewing within the British royal family? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you don't want to miss the next shocking royal mysteries, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because the truth sometimes begins with what no one is allowed to see.